We have a team on the ground in Des Moines, Iowa for this crucial day that could shape the rest of the 2020 race. My colleague Elaine Quijano is there. Elaine takes over now.
Thank you, Tanya. Here with me now are Caitlin Huey-Burns and Kate Payne. Caitlin is a CBSN political reporter. Kate is a reporter for Iowa Public Radio and co-host of the Caucus Land podcast. Welcome to you both. It's nice to actually talk to you both in person. The day is finally here. Kate, I want to start with you. Take us inside what's going to be happening during these caucus meetings. What will the actual experience be like for people who participate?
So at these Democratic caucuses, you're going to have these caucus goers go into rooms, into cafeterias, gymnasiums, church basements, and they're going to be splitting off into preference groups by candidate. And that's when the lobbying, the debating, the back and forth between these preference groups will happen. And it could be really busy, potentially emotional, potentially even a little chaotic at some of these larger sites as people debate about which candidate they think is going to be best.
And Caitlin, I know you're planning on visiting one of these sites later today. What are you going to be watching for?
Well, I'm watching for all the jockeying that goes on at these kinds of caucuses, because you're not going into a booth and checking off a name and leaving. You're going there. You're going to see your friends and your neighbors and other people that you know in the same room. You're going to see how people are deciding on a candidate. So you'll see a group for candidate A over here, a group for candidate B over here, and kind of all around the room. So I'm looking to see how people are persuaded. We went to a lot of events over the weekend and talked to a lot of voters who were there trying to figure out who their second choice was going to be, because as Kate mentioned, it's all about preferences, and if your candidate doesn't get 15% of those in the room, you can then pick a second choice. So we saw candidates this weekend out shopping for who they might choose if their first candidate isn't viable in that first round. So you're going to see a lot of that going on a caucus night.
And I know, Kate, there is so much interest, right? In fact, Iowa Democrats are saying perhaps record turnout tonight.
Absolutely.
So how are all these precincts preparing for that?
It really depends site to site, but folks are being prepared with even more of the paperwork that's involved as far as voter registration. People are expecting a lot of new caucus goers to come to these sites. And then those preference cards as well. For the first time this cycle, Democrats will be writing down their choice on something sort of like a ballot that will be able to be recounted if there needs to be an instance of recount. But otherwise, Democrats are encouraging people to get there early. These folks have to be in line at 7 p.m. in order to be able to participate.
And I know, Kate, in a piece that you wrote for today, you talk about how these are really an opportunity for people in the rural parts of the state especially to get involved in politics. Why is that?
Absolutely. So Iowans have been caucusing since before Iowa was a state, and so really encouraging people to get involved in their neighborhood areas, really building the Democratic and Republican parties from the neighborhoods on up. And so we definitely do see in the rural parts of the state that it is one of the best ways for people to get involved in politics, to have these really weighty, important discussions about what matters to them with their family, their friends, their neighbors, and hoping that they stay involved in that political process from the neighborhood on up.
At the same time, Caitlin, I know there has been some debate in Democratic circles about not just Iowa, but New Hampshire having outsized influence in this whole process because of the fact that they're both early states. You have caucuses here, you have a primary in New Hampshire. What's your take on that, and how much should we actually read in to what we're going to see tonight in Iowa?
That's right. There's a lot of criticism coming from Democrats saying that these states are not representative of the Democratic Party at large. The Democratic candidates who are competing in states like Iowa and New Hampshire say these are the rules, but it's been interesting to hear surrogates for Elizabeth Warren, Ayanna Pressley, Julian Castro. They've been out there being very critical of this process, and the candidates know that these are the rules this time around. They need to compete. What I'm watching for, though, is how whomever emerges as the winner here or is able to take delegates, how that changes the process. And also you're hearing voters, even here in Iowa, asking a lot of these candidates how they're going to attract a more diverse group. So this is something that Iowans are paying attention to as well.
Kate, this is all happening, of course, against the backdrop of the impeachment trial still going on in Washington. So there really has not been a caucus night quite like the one that's going to be taking place later tonight. You you also have the absences of Senators Warren, Klobuchar, Sanders. How significant do you think that is, and what is the impact of those absences actually going to be here in Iowa, you think?
So one thing that we're seeing in this cycle is there are so many undecided people. I talked to somebody yesterday who was seeing a candidate for the very first time the day before caucus night.
The first time?
Yes,
really?
yes.
Wow.
And so for those people who are just keying into this race really at the last second, they maybe didn't have the chance to see a Senator Amy Klobuchar, a Senator Elizabeth Warren in person. And you hear from so many caucus goers that having that in-person experience can make a difference for them in really pledging to that candidate. So it's certainly not ideal for some of those senators. That being said, they've been coming to the state for months, working on a year. So a lot of that groundwork has been laid. They've built the organizations. Those personal relationships with field organizers have been built for these most energized Iowa caucus goers, but it really could come down to those people who are just getting involved in the process for the first time.
So, Caitlin, I know over the last few days here in the final stretch, you have been talking to voters. What's your sense of how they're actually planning to approach this decision tonight?
That's right. I've been finding what you've been finding, that a lot of voters are waiting till they actually get in the room to make that decision.
Really?
We talked to voters, going to these candidate events. One woman I spoke to said that she was going to spend her weekend going to candidate events. She had 4 on her list. This was in Cedar Rapids. She was lucky because all the candidates were going there. They've said that, look, they've been watching these candidates this whole time, but now is decision time, and there's been a lot going on, a lot competing for their attention. They've been looking at polling. They've been looking at what their friends and neighbors say. They've been looking at what the candidates' closing arguments are. And that's what's been interesting, too, to see that the closing arguments from the candidates aren't on specific policy measures. They are all about electability and uniting the party. And that's what you're hearing from Elizabeth Warren, from Joe Biden, from all these candidates. They're trying to make the case that they can win in November, because that's what we've seen in this caucus process, that these voters are very much focused on that top priority, which in their view is defeating Donald Trump for Democrats.
All right, cannot wait to see what happens tonight. Caitlin and Kate, thank you both very much.
Thank you.